On this episode of the show, I have with me Alex Salazar. He is co-founder and CEO at Arcade.dev. We're going to be talking about enterprise agents. We got a whole lot to get in here, but we're going to talk about why they're hard to build, but also simple to understand, and where some of those nuances. Why is it a little bit tricky to get these things into production, and where are we seeing success with this enterprise agent component? And we're going to talk a little bit about, discovery, reference architecture, security. We're going to talk a little bit about, board support if you're out there and you're worried about how to position this stuff and try to get people behind you. A whole lot of stuff around enterprise agents. Alex, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Tell us what you guys do at the company before we dive in.
Yeah. So Arcade.dev is, think of it like we call it an actions platform. And so if you're building an agent, you think of like GPT-5 or Claude 4 as the brain of your agent. We're like the hands of your agent. We're how the agent talks to other services. And so think of it like integrations. People talk a lot about MCP. That is one of the protocols we support. And kind of the big claim to fame of our integrations work is, one, they're very good. They work very well perform very well on tool selection and parameter prediction. But most importantly, we support agent authorization. And so we can assert and make sure it works that when an agent tries to do something, we can do an authorization check of, can this agent on behalf of this user perform this action on this resource?
And I guess, this conversation around enterprise agents, we started off talking about this around, they are very hard to build, but also very simple conceptually. I guess as a starting point, if you can maybe break down what that means, as they are very hard to build, but also very simple in understanding of what we're trying to do with them.
Yeah. So I think the industry has made it harder to wrap your head around, which I think is a shame because it's not actually that hard. And they made it really hard because a lot of people are trying to cram like way too many concepts into the term agent. But in my mind, an agent is like any other piece of software. It is a workflow automation. The big difference between an agent and like a traditional web application is that the kind of the engine of that workflow system is a large language model. And so in normal software, the workflow is predetermined. You're gonna do step one, step two, step three, and then at step three, there's going to be an if-else check, and then you're going to go to step 5 or step 6. And that's all predetermined in code. In an agent, it's the same. It can and should be a very similar process, except when you hit that decision point, it's a large language model making the determination. And so it's non-deterministic, it's probabilistic. And so as a result of that, the piece of software, the agent, can perform much more complicated decisions, but it comes at the expense of not being able to trust the agent to make the right decision every time, because it can hallucinate, it can have errors in ways that traditional software hasn't had before. And so in my mind, it's just workflow software. It's just a much more advanced workflow system that comes at the expense of hallucinations.
You mentioned obviously there is a nuance here. Obviously, we do have a frame of reference of trying to automate workflows, not being able to believe and trust that the right decision is being made is definitely something. When it comes to the nuance of what we've seen previously with trying to do workflow automation, with what agents are trying to do, is it a case of we haven't figured out yet how to best let go of control and come up with workflows that allow the agent to do things? Is it a case of it's just still early in the process? Is there something that kind of keeps us from re-envisioning and kind of getting into the depth of how these agents could help us?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. And I think an important point to kind of lead into that answer where I think a lot of people are getting caught up is an agent is not an agent until it can take action. And so if it can't talk to Gmail and it can't talk to the CRM and it can't manipulate something, it's just a chatbot. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in, is that a lot of people's vision of an agent is really just a glorified chatbot. But what real agents are workflow systems that can take action, they can access real data. More importantly, they can manipulate the data and kick off other pieces of workflow. And so first step in the problem, if you will, is that most people don't know the art of the possible. And so we're still in a world where most people are thinking about agents as like co-pilots, as chatbot assistants that can give you advice, but expect you to be the one that takes the action, right? The burden of the work is still on the human, not on the agent. You see this with all the SaaS vendors as they start to release their agents. They can't do much. They can just give you advice. You see it with all of the chatbots on people's websites that are supposed to be a support agent, but all they can really do is regurgitate the knowledge base. But if you ask it where your order is, it can't answer. And so part of the problem is people thinking beyond that and really pushing the art of the possible, because the art of the possible is already here. Like, you can already build agents that can take secure actions. You just haven't seen many of them because, it's not many of them have been fully released, or a lot of them are internal to the organizations and are not publicly available. So they're internal agents. The other problem is one of technology. So it is still very hard to build an agent. You have to know what you're doing. It's, for a web developer to go open up their IDE and go build an agent is still really challenging, because there's a whole paradigm shift on how do you build it, how do you write it, how do you test it. The whole stack is completely different. The way you test things is completely different. The whole mental model is different, because at every point you have to deal with probabilities. The non-determinism changes everything. Conversely, machine learning engineers who are actually very steeped in non-determinism, they have to pick up traditional software development. How do you build production-grade software? And so everybody's got a bit of a learning curve, and that's holding it back. And then the last piece is, the ecosystem's relatively early. Outside of Arcade, I don't know of many ways, if any, that an agent can go take an authenticated and authorized request to a third-party service. Like, ChatGPT still can't send an email. Claude still can't send an email. MCP, which we're very big believers in, still doesn't have the notion of tool authorization in it. We're the authors of the RFC, so my hope is by the end of the year it will have that. But that stuff's all still coming.
If we were to look back at various technology cycles, innovations, everything you just said, I could probably draw an analogy to a various different technology that we've gone through, the same type of, hey, it's a little bit hard initially. The tooling's not there. There's some unknowns. There's trust issues. There's security issues. And then it goes through its cycle, and we start finding that we delivered some tools and some simplicity around building. And then we see adoption because people start having confidence that the technology is there. I guess the question here is, I'm sure as you allude to, we're going to see it. It's inevitable. When it comes to this, you mentioned taking action. All those other previous cycles still let the human have full control over everything. And I guess as humans, we are built. We like the illusion of control. Even if we don't have it, we like to believe it's there. When it comes to agents acting on behalf, or at least suggesting strongly what to do, is that just a matter of repetition, comfort, need to see metrics? Like, what will move people to actually go, you know what, I'm going to let this agent do this. I'm confident it's the right thing.
Yeah. I argue you're starting to see it, but the pattern isn't that different, right? Like, let's take something super sensitive, like a wire transfer. You would never trust an agent to do a wire transfer today. Maybe in a year, but not right now. But no one really touches a wire transfer, even in normal software today, right? When you hit issue wire transfer on your bank's website, there's no humans involved in most banks. Like, that's already been fully automated. And a lot of it is cloud-based, right? And not too long ago, no one trusted the cloud. All of it's internet-based. And what, like 25 years ago, like no one trusted the internet. And so we already have a tremendous amount of automation in our daily lives, and actually almost, and even more so in really sensitive and secure parts of our lives. Agents are just another level of abstraction, in the never-ending journey of more and more automation that, humans have been on since we invented the wheel. But that new level of abstraction, that new innovation is so early that it has a lot of kinks in it. And so the first wave of it is already happening, and it's happening on low risk things where we feel more comfortable if it gets it wrong, right? You're already seeing a ton of agents operating autonomously on social media and on Reddit, for better or worse. And because those are low risk, if the agent says something stupid, like no big deal, you delete it and you move on. But it's not yet doing wire transfers. But the bet of Arcade is that we're going to blink and it's going to be doing wire transfers.
That's a great example. And I think for anyone who's listening that's outside of the space, that does make a lot of sense. And I guess when we think about that, and we think about, you said something interesting about humans, and since the beginning of time, we've just developed technology to simplify everything we do. I mean, we do everything we can to save time. I mean, every service we use now, you have a food delivery service to bring you food, don't go to the grocery store, have Amazon deliver something. It's all designed for us to do less and less. I mean, I view AI as an evolution of what we've seen. I guess the technology breakthrough is one thing, but the technology breakthrough is there because it supports what we want as humans, as society. This notion of the bank transfer happening already, no one thinks twice about it. I think, in fact, if you told somebody, go into the bank to do this in person, they would be suspect as to why do you want me in the bank, is very profound because, anytime I post about AI now, I get some message about a negative thing. And I'm like, you didn't order books on Amazon in 2006, whatever that was. I don't remember the year anymore. You would be afraid to do that. So you do that right now without even a second thought. This is just another service. And I guess when you think about companies, and you mentioned companies that are, going through the cycle of, hey, we have, web developers here, they have to ramp up into this. We have sophisticated developers like ML engineering, specialized, but they can't do some of the normal things. Enterprises in the middle are trying to figure out, how do we actually close that last mile gap? And how do we deliver some of these solutions? I feel there's a lot of chaos in the middle. Like, I don't know if anybody will come out and say it, but I actually feel there's a lot of chaos that's going on in terms of people just desperately trying to get some footing as to where to start, how to start. Is that something you're seeing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would say there's chaos, at the top, at the bottom, and in the middle. I think it just looks different at different tiers of the market. I think, the easy chaos is the chaos at the bottom, right? Like the hobbyists and the startups. And that chaos is normal, right? Like, it's just everyone's throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And the hobbyists don't tend to lose. And the startups are designed to go take these long shots. And the whole startup ecosystem is designed to go fund these long shots. And then some of them will hit, and like the history of tech, some of it won't. And that's already, there's no news there because that's just how it's always worked. At the high end, it's fascinating because for the first time ever, when you talk about the Fortune 1000 and the Fortune 100, for the first time ever, they're leading the charge on innovation. It is blown my mind. And but there's chaos there too. It just looks a little different. One, they've already been making investments in machine learning and data science for a decade. And so they already have the bench. They've been collecting a ton of data for a long time. So they already have some of the assets. And because they're so big, a small improvement on a process that's relatively low risk can have such a big outcome on an absolute basis. Like if you improve, the mortgage application rate, completion rate by like 2%, that's a material impact to a mortgage company that's very large. And that can easily pay for all of the investments that had to go into making that agent. And so you're seeing a lot of motivation from large enterprise because they just happen to be sitting in a really good place this time around. But the chaos there looks a little different because the chaos looks like multiple different teams all trying to throw stuff against the wall, but internally. And so 4 out of 5 teams won't be able to build anything, but one team will get it working. And then everybody kind of gravitates towards that. And so because they have the budgets, you're seeing a lot more progress with them. Where it gets hard is the middle of the market. The companies that have between 100 and 1,000 or 2,000 employees, or maybe even smaller than that. And the problem there is very few of them have been investing in machine learning engineers for the last decade. And, and they might not have the budgets to go hire these teams to go effectively run experiments because this stuff is relatively early. And so there aren't yet a whole bench of consultants that can come in and tell you that they can absolutely go from point A to point B and give you a deliverable that'll work. There's a bit more experimentation needed, and so you might kick off 3 projects and only one of them might succeed. And that kind of economics doesn't lend itself great to most mid-market companies. And so I think that's where a lot of the challenge sits in the market. I think everybody's challenged, but I think the mid-market is most challenged.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I tend to bring this up, and obviously you've shed a lot of light on this. I've mentioned I've not seen a time in other technology spikes where every company is willing to ride that bleeding edge. And I've asked this question, and you answered it. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think it's a point to be clarified. Is I do think you said the Fortune 1000. There are companies that have been investing into evolving their engineering capabilities. Then you have companies that are trying to ramp up and just figure it out. They've mentioned it's muscle memory. It's developing a center of excellence, a center of competency. A lot of words for we actually don't have any skills to do this. And there's a lot of money being burned at that level trying to develop skills. And the gap from, yes, we develop apps for internal applications, even maybe mobile apps. That's fantastic. We have some infrastructure people. All that's great. But the gap to going to machine learning, understanding where these agents fit, having the data ready to be consumed for those type of applications, that gap seems to me, from the outside looking at, wider than a lot of times it gets discussed. If you were looking at that gap from Fortune 1000 and then you're looking at a 5,000 person company who knows they need to build strength into AI, what does that non-Fortune 1000 company do? Do they wait for vendors to come out with more tools? Do they keep investing in building out strength? Because they're all afraid that if they don't, their competitors are also trying to burn cycles and figure this out. Meanwhile, everyone's just burning a ton of money. And outside of Fortune 1000, there might not be a lot of real, ROI-driven projects out there that are going live.
Yeah, well, I would say, you'd be surprised how many are going live. But it's like the wave of stuff that's going to be released in the next 12 months is going to be really shocking to people. I also think, the wave of stuff that's been released has also been really shocking, right? Like, it's not just, it hasn't shown up. Like, I think it's happening so fast, but it's happening on such a stream that I think a lot of people don't even realize how accustomed you become to it. Dude, ChatGPT is like, what, not even 3 years old yet? And it's already completely upended everybody's lives. And so I think we take for granted how fast we're getting used to the stuff that's being released. So to answer your question, what does somebody do? I have a lot of empathy for that question. There's no answer you're going to like, right? Like AI is moving up. Look, this is my third cycle. I was in like high school when the internet boom came out. I was a computer scientist like during the tail end of that. My professional career was largely like squarely in the cloud movement where my last company was started. And now I'm living through the agent wave. And I've never seen anything move this fast. Like internet didn't move this fast. Cloud for sure did not move this fast. And so if I'm a company, the risk of me becoming the blockbuster to someone's Netflix is extremely high. Right? Just look at every single YC company coming out. Like there's like 100 organizations just out of that one source that's just taking shots on goal on like every category in every industry. And almost every company we talk to is already actively investing themselves. And so they are taking shots on goal as well. And so everyone's taking shots on goal. And if you're not taking shots on goal, the chances you're going to wake up and it's going to be too late is very high. Not to say that it will or won't happen, but you're kind of letting the odds get away from you. But what do you do? The hard answer is you have to invest. And that requires ideally hiring someone, at least one person on staff that understands non-deterministic systems, understands models like a machine learning engineer. That's hard and very expensive. Those people aren't cheap. And then but probably more of an you have to up-level the team you have. If you have software engineers on staff, you need to carve out time for them to go play, for them to go experiment. There are no courses, and any book that's printed is obsolete by the time it hits the bookshelves. And so the only real way I know how to do it is to tinker, is to carve out time to just go build stuff and see what you run into. Because that's the only way I know how to learn right now with agents. And as a proof point, you have to take it all the way to prod, because I think one of the places where most people I talk to get stuck is they get a demo working. It's very easy to get demo working. The models carry a lot of water for you at a demo level. And so you can hit the demo, and in traditional software development, when you get the demo, you're like 80% there, right? Then the remaining 20% is just hardening it and making it scalable and all that fun stuff, which is typically just like it's a straight shot most of the time. In agent world, the demo is like 20% of the work. You might get something working in demo, but to get it to production, you have to completely re-engineer it, because the way agents are measured, like the primary performance metric, is consistency and accuracy, right? The inverse of hallucinations, like how often is it doing the right thing the right way? And in a demo, you can get it working where it's like 50% accuracy, or maybe at best 60% accuracy if you're lucky, but you can't go to prod if you're not hitting like 80% and above. And it's not often like a linear progression. Like it often does require things being completely re-architected. And so that 80% of the work to get there, that's where all the energy, that's where all the learning goes. And so you have to let your engineering teams go through that full cycle so they can hit all the brick walls they're going to hit, and then come out the other side going, oh, this is how we got it working. And then when they go build the next agent or the next agentic feature, they're that much further ahead. But it is muscle memory.
It's interesting. I always, when I talk to startup or enterprise company, I'm always like, I feel like there's an arms race going on. And you got all these startups that are that don't necessarily have the data, but they have the technology to do more with less data. And then you have all these legacy companies that are sending piles of data that maybe they don't have what you described, some of the technical capabilities. And I do feel like you've got to feel under the pressure of delivering some of these advanced technologies if you're at that legacy size, enterprise size company, because otherwise, the shifts are coming. Like, I mean, it's pretty tangible. I mean, you described it very well. I guess if you are sitting there and you're talking about, hey, you still have to go build muscle memory and you can't stop at a POC. You have to carry over to prod. If there's a case where we necessarily haven't gone through this life cycle, right? We're an enterprise company. We don't necessarily deliver agents. It might be our first time. We're thinking about finding the right use case that we can take to production and also be able to build confidence that 80% really means 80%. There's got to be some steps that a lot of people maybe that have not gone through that end to end haven't paid attention to some process there that would benefit. Is there anything, any light you could shed on that for us?
Yeah, how long do you have? But
yeah, it depends. We can go long. As long as people listen, we keep going.
All right. So yes, the answer is yes. We have a playbook for what we think works and what we've seen work. I think the first one, it starts with really taking a look at your business and figuring out, hey, where are some low risk places that we think we could have outsized impact if we automated it, that we can't automate today, right? We can't automate with traditional software. And that can be anything, right? Like, I'll give you an example. There's like a mortgage company we talked to, and they have like an 85% drop off rate on their mortgage applications. And so they're building like an agent going to agentify the application process. And they only get like a few percentage points improvements on this thing. It's a huge impact to the business, but it's also relatively low risk because the numbers are so low that there's not a lot of risk of it getting worse. And the way they're going about the agent, they're not doing anything terribly risky from a security perspective or a safety perspective. And so it's not the highest risk project they've undertaken. And so that's a really good example, right? It's low risk, but potentially high reward. So identifying those opportunities is great. And I would identify like as many as you possibly can. Like, minimum should be like 10, right? To really force you to think through your business and your operations. The other filter then is like, what can be the smallest thing we can build? Because agents are very complicated. And so like the more complex the automation, the lower the probability you're going to be successful, especially if it's your first agent out the door. And so build something, really like as narrow as humanly possible. And so then if you've got this list of all of these like really high impact, low risk opportunities, and then you've cross-sliced them with like, which of them can be really, really narrow, now all of a sudden you're in a really good spot. I would add one third one, which is like, where do we already have programmatic access? Which is a fancy way of saying, where do we already have APIs available to us? Because if there's not an API available, the complexity and risk goes up really high. Like if you're trying to do browser-based automation, you're going to run into bot detection, you're going to run into all kinds of authentication issues, complexity, it's going to be a lot more expensive, a lot slower. Like there are incredible automations that can be built for web-based flows, but the complexity goes up. And the chance and the likelihood of success for secure stuff goes down. So those are my three filters. And then from there, hopefully you've got more than one or two or three that might fit the bill. I would, if you have the bandwidth and the resources, I would pick more than one and have them run in parallel. But if you don't, and most mid-market companies probably don't, just pick the one you're most excited about and just run.
Absolutely. It's interesting. You kind of simplified it. It makes sense from a business perspective to understand maybe where we're going to go. And I guess maybe it is twofold. One, you have to be able to re-envision your business workflows slightly differently. You have to think about where the handoffs are potentially going to change and how you want that to work and how much human in the loop do you want. I guess that there's some pure workflow things you do have to think through, which is maybe the simple part you alluded to early on. The building them is where we start getting into the depth and the complexity.
And so on the building piece, like once you've figured out what it is you want to start with, similarly, there's like, I think there's a pretty good playbook on how to build. And the part that's not intuitive is you have to start with your evals. And so for people who don't know what evals are, you have to start with the inputs that you're going to give it. And then for each of those inputs, the expected outputs. So think of it kind of like test-driven development from the web world. Similar concept, you're going to start with evals. Evals are like the way you test non-deterministic systems, how you test models. And so, let's say we're going to do like a mortgage application agent, right? At every step in the agent, what's likely going to be the input to the agent? Okay, I'm at this step, and I expect the agent to take the context of the thread, the information we already have, and I expect it to then make a decision on what next step to go to and what information to pull. And so in your evals, you're going to say, okay, based on this context, this prompt, whatever, I would expect the agent to make this decision and output this thing. And just do it in Excel, right? Or Google Sheets. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to like boil the ocean. Just write out, hey, for this input, that output. For this input, that output. And you can start there. And when you start with your evals, you always have like a ground truth to go back to see if you got there or not. And then from there, it starts looking a lot more like software development. It's like you got to pick your model. Very first step, like what model are you going to pick? Are you going to be picking, OpenAI's models? Are you going to pick Anthropic's models? Are you going to pick an open source model? There's a lot of things you got to think through on model selection. I would argue if you're building a true agent, which takes action, the most important thing you got to pick in your model is how good are they at tool calling, tool use. And as of the recording of this, that tends to be the flagship models, the OpenAIs and the Anthropics. But there's a lot of other companies, a lot of other models are catching up. The open source models are catching up on tool use. So by the time you start, it might be a different answer, but it has got to be good at tool use. And then from there, cost and speed and performance and whatever other requirements you might have. And then from there, you've got to pick a framework. Very people will build a web application without a framework. If you're working in Python, you grab Django or Flask. If you're working in Node, you grab Express. If you're working in Java, you grab Spring. And so similarly with an agent, you should grab a framework. There's a lot of frameworks out there. The most notable are, LangGraph and OpenAI's Agent SDK, Mastra, Pydantic, CrewAI. Pick the one that makes the most sense for you. I would ask around to see who's going to production. As of the recording of this, what we see mostly in production is LangGraph. And so, pick what works for you. Most agents are built in Python or TypeScript, so I don't know that I would deviate outside of those yet. And then from there, you got to figure out how you're going to do tool calling and tool execution. Arcade is fantastic for that. And we handle all the authorization, which is a problem you're going to run into. Is like, how's the agent going to authenticate into those systems that you want to talk to? Any system that matters that you want to talk to is going to have some degree of security layer. So how are you going to get through that? I think we're a great option for that, but ultimately you got to figure that out one way or the other. And if you've got all of that like set up architecturally, the rest is normal software development, right? Where you host it, how you're doing, your load balancing, all that stuff looks a lot like what you already do with AWS or Azure.
That's fantastic, by the way. I think that's a great framework, a playbook for somebody to have an idea of if they are heading down the right path. And you touched on this, and maybe we can go a little bit deeper on that authorization component and security. Because I guess if you have worked within development, you do have security, you do have authentication, authorization. When it comes to an agent, how does that look different? And kind of highlight where those differences might sit.
Yeah. So, man, agent, what people call agent auth is this conversation, I think, that vendors have made very complicated, but actually isn't that complicated. I think A lot of vendors kind of everybody's trying to like AI wash what they do, which is fascinating to watch, but it's creating a lot of confusion in the market. And so let's first talk about what it's not. A lot of people want to think of agents like people. And so you'll hear a lot of conversation around non-human identity. And that doesn't work. Like, we've never seen that in production. It doesn't really work because it's not really where the problem is. The problem isn't, hey, is this agent the agent I think it is? And what can this agent do? That's not really the issue. That's really an authentication issue. The real issue is authorization. Now, what the agent can do, you can give agent permissions, which is what, people, the first naive implementation of agents is, we're going to create an identity for the agent. We're going to give the agent its own permissions. It doesn't work because you create what's called a bypass vulnerability. And so this is the case with most RAG systems. If I give an agent any kind of permissions, but then a user comes in that has lower set of permissions than the agent itself, the user has now escalated their privileges using the agent. This is such a big problem. This is almost universally a problem for almost all RAG systems. In fact, I don't know many RAG systems that don't have this problem. As a result, most RAG systems access only public information. So if a classic example is the support bots on websites. They can regurgitate the public knowledge base, but they can't tell you where your order is because they can't assert that if I, Alex, ask it for your order information, that it won't accidentally give it to me. And so agent identity has kind of been dead on arrival since day one for that reason. The other side of the equation is what you see a lot of MCP servers doing, which is I'm going to give it the user's credentials. And so I'm using an MCP server, I install it on my computer, and then I drop in my creds. And then it goes and accesses GitHub or email or whatever as me. Well, that's also not going to work in production because that creates a big safety issue. If you've ever used Cursor, this happened to me, you might have seen Cursor try and accidentally delete something it shouldn't be deleting. It tried to delete my root directory once. Now, it couldn't, thank God, because it didn't have sudo access on my Mac, which is great. It wasn't authorized to delete my root directory. But I have access to delete my root directory because I'm the root user on my Mac. And so if we give agents all of the exact same credentials and permissions as the end users, we run into safety issues. It might delete emails. It might delete files and folders that you don't necessarily want it to be able to do. And so the right answer is what's called delegated authorization, OAuth. And this is what we do. And so we ultimately take the intersection of what the agent's permissions are. What do we allow the agent to do? We might not allow it to delete folders. And we take the intersection of what the user is allowed to do. The user can access, I can access my order information, but I can't access your order information. And by taking the intersection, we can then assert that any action being performed is safe and secure. The agent's allowed to do it, and the user for which it's doing it on behalf of is also allowed to do it. And that works really well. But it's not just a tinfoil hat, security, I gotta make my CISO happy problem. It also blocks legitimate, just basic functionality of agents. Why can't ChatGPT send an email? It's 2025. You still can't send an email, nor can Claude. It's because of this. And so most agents, why have you not seen a personal assistant agent? Because they don't know how to access your email or your calendar very easily. That's because of this problem. And this extends all the way through to enterprise systems, right? How does a salesperson access information on the Goldman Sachs account in the CRM, right? And not be able to access the Department of Defense's account in the CRM because there's different permissions. How do you access financial systems? How do you access all the productivity systems, the accounting system? All the agent workflows everybody wants are largely protected by systems that require delegated authorization. And we unblock that. Very
cool. That is very cool. It's interesting you mentioned that because I like playing with some of these tools that come out. I've tried that ChatGPT connector into Gmail. does a great job of looking into your email. It can't do anything, obviously, as you alluded to. And that's where you're like, I could see how great this would be. But then also, second thoughts, I was like, well, I wonder if I were told to do this, like, what if there's an exception? It sent something it shouldn't have. So I guess in the back of my mind, even, I was like, okay, it's probably better that it tells me here's the things I could do, and then I take over. And we're going to get there. It sounds like we will.
Well, I would argue that the answer to that question is already possible today, which is what people call human in the loop. Right? And so you can still have an agent go send an email and go do all the things we just talked about. Just at, right before it hits that send that send button, it just checks with you first. Hey, I'm about to send this message. Are you cool? Yes, enter. Boom, sent. And I think that's a good place for agents to live today, as the technology is still improving. But I think in 24 months, maybe even less, I think we're going to see a lot more autonomous agents. But I think for most people, autonomous agents is probably not the place to start.
Absolutely. You kind of partially answered my last question I was going to ask you, and maybe there's a piece of it that's left. So invariably, when episodes like this go out, people listen to it, and their initial thought is, well, this is another case of technology hyping technology. We're still working through it. It hasn't come here, and if it's going to come here, it's going to have nefarious purposes. Like I think iRobot really messed with people's minds of what technology could do if it goes wrong. I know we're not talking about robotics here, but if you were to look at, and you said 24 months we're going to see a lot of growth in this area. If you were to look at the previous technology cycles where we talked about similar fears, concerns, we've seen the acceleration of how much work is going this. Are we going to see a similar, adoption in terms of the rate of adoption as well? Or is this a case of technology is just running in front and people kind of see this as a moving target? When they get comfortable with one notion, the next thing's there, and they're kind of left in balance. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing it. I always find it fascinating when people say, how real is the AI, wave? And then I kind of look at them and I'm like, dude, when was the last time you Googled something? And so I think, again, people have taken, one of the things that's really blown my mind is how much people have taken for granted how much they've already adopted. And so, they're sitting there and, they're using the agents, and they're like, well, who's really using agents? I'm like, you are. You just don't realize you're using them half the time. And so I think the difference between the last waves and this wave, in my mind, is just the pace at which it's happening. It is happening. I'm going to make up a fake number, but I would say it feels like it's happening twice as fast. And so I think that's the part that's hardest for everybody, to predict what's going to happen. And, because, we're not really going to see where the negative externalities are going to be until they're already upon us in many cases. And I don't think they're going to be the things that people are as worried about. I'll give you an example. People go, oh, well, what if the AI goes rogue? Like, maybe, but if somebody works with AI every day, I think that gives AI way too much credit. We talk about AI all day, but we're really talking about our large language models. And large language models are really just next token predictors. And so they're faking intelligence. They don't really have intelligence. And so I get a little less worried, about rogue AI. I get much more worried about AI just making a mistake and that causing a problem. But, that's incumbent on the industry to just do what it's always done, which is, you just get better at error management and error recovery. And we did that with cloud. AWS was hot garbage from a reliability perspective, but then the whole industry of DevOps was invented, and companies like HashiCorp came out, and now a cloud-based system is the most resilient system out there. Despite the underlying, issues with how cloud and virtual machines work. The same thing's already happening with agents. Where I think we'll have to just really watch is how does this change society? Something I watch all the time. My kids use AI all day long. They think Google's a voice. They don't know it's an actual web app. And so, what will that mean? Just like we learned how to use a calculator and our parents were upset that we couldn't multiply really big numbers in our heads. We ended up really focusing on other things. We ended up focusing on, on the conceptual things as opposed to like the raw arithmetic. I think for our kids, I don't know how much like the raw spelling and grammar is going to matter versus like the higher level conceptual stuff, but it's too early to tell.
All the times my parents were called into the school with complaints of how poor my penmanship was, and only to realize that at a certain age I never really wrote again. It was all typed out. I'm like, you could have saved me so much of grief, but that's exactly how I view it. I feel exactly the same as you have.
Yeah, I'll give you a preview into the future because I have young kids who are very tech forward. I don't know that my youngest kids are going to learn how to use a mouse, and very few of my kids are any good at typing, and I don't know that it matters. And when I watch like people under 30 and especially people under 25, the visible immediate frustration they have when they have to learn a user interface of any kind, and they go figure out what the menus are and where to click, it's fascinating. That generation and younger expect a very different type of user experience. They expect to just explain their intentions and get the expected result. They're not going to read your docs and they're not going to click around your menus and your UI to go find the right thing in the right way. Like that to them feels archaic as it feels for our generation to pick up the phone and call a company.
I've recorded an episode, hasn't gone live yet, with CEO of Live Kit, and we talked about the changes coming with stronger voice AI, and I agreed with him, and I'm a firm believer that our notion of what we see as how we interact with all our devices, whether it's the phone, the computer, I think it's all going to radically shift much faster. I do think that the phone will lose its intelligence, and it'll just be a screen you fold up in your pocket you never take out unless you really need it, and you'll have another way. I don't know what that is. I'm not smart enough to invent that, but I could definitely see the UI breaks and we go into a whole different paradigm of how we interact and get information. And it's already here. People are, like you said, your kids, people go with ChatGPT. They're okay with one answer and not scrolling. Actually, I think people like whatever the answer is. They take it as gospel. They never go, well, let me check it if it's the answer right or wrong. They're like, oh, that's what ChatGPT said. I'm going with that. It's first answer, and I'm going with it.
Yeah, and we all clutch our pearls when that happens. But don't forget that our generation did the same thing with Google, right? You'd find the first link on Google, you click it, and be like, well, this is gospel.
Yeah. It wasn't until the ads that came out, then you're like, oh, okay, well, now we need to go to page 5 because the first 75% of this is all just landing pages and ads, and I can't find what I want. That's what really happened to Google when it first came out to now, because originally with Google, you're right, I remember it. You popped on, first link was as good as it needed to be. You're like, it's the information I need. I don't need to go search for an hour down the rabbit hole of Google's crawl pages.
Yeah, it's fascinating changes.
Absolutely. All right, man. I know you got to get back to it. You got to get back to doing what you do. We covered a lot of territory. Thank you for the time. If somebody wants to learn more, they might have a follow-up, they're curious on some of the framework components, what are some good ways of learning, getting in touch, etc.? Yeah,
that's a good question. And there's multiple ways. So the easiest way is to go to our website, sign up and play with it. We can always email us on contact@arcade.dev. And you can also join our Discord community, where we have our developer advocates on there helping people answer questions and build the things we're trying to build. So, we'd love for you to check us out and try and build something cool with us. We're happy to help.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for the time, Alex. I really do appreciate it.
All right, have a good one.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for the episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. This is a great episode for you guys to share because I think Alex covered enterprise agents soup to nuts. We covered a lot. This episode's a little bit longer than I typically do, but I thought it was necessary to actually go through the subject of what is hard about it, what's easy about it. Talked about the reference architecture, talked a little bit about even some of the adoption and changes that you need to do. Key takeaways go from POC to production. That's something that he mentioned as a key to driving, and how to actually start getting up to speed on this faster and developing some of that muscle memory is okay. We covered a ton. I can't get it all to you, but please share this episode with others that could benefit. I really would appreciate it. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.